All right, well, let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. This time not to anatomy, but to biology. A lot of you know me. We have fewer participants than we did the other day. Understandable. We've got a nice sunny Friday out there. What I've decided for today is that we're going to run through the administrative components, introducing you to the course plan, what the schedule is going to look like, evaluation methods, similar to what we did on Tuesday. And then I'm going to then go through the lecture material with you live today. I decided to do that because I think we're going to get through the admin a lot quicker than we did on Tuesday, just because I was taking my time. So that way we can sort of cover everything here live. It'll all be still recorded for those of you unable to be here. We should still be able to get out of here in some decent time. So again, welcome to biology. I hope it's been a good week for you. Busy, but nonetheless, hopefully you're starting to feel grounded, getting all the pieces put together, and you know what's going to be expected of you for all of your different courses. And you've had a chance now, at this point, I think, right? I'm the last in your week, to meet all of your instructors. So for those of you who weren't here maybe on Tuesday, I am Jonathan. I am your professor for both biology as well as anatomy. I won't go through any of prior academic experience again, but I will introduce, if anybody's new here, to my kids. So there's Kaylin 5, Abigail 3, and my wife Andrea, who keeps me sane through all of the chaos. So you can contact me at jhead@fanshawonline.ca. I will get back to you as soon as possible. Hopefully I've been keeping to my word with those of you trying to get a hold of me this week. 24 hours is the max cap, but we'll definitely stay below that, okay, as quick as possible. So we're going to be meeting on Fridays at 1 live to 2 o'clock. And then from 2 to 4, that's sort of offline office hours when I will be available. So what I've decided to do is going forward after this week, we will pre-record and then post those lectures to FOL. That's going to be done, hopefully, my goal at this point is Sunday. I'm going to stick to that, hopefully. Your announcements will come live Saturday morning, and then the content will be there Sunday evening. So tutorials live Friday at 1. I'm hoping, because we're at the end of the week, that's going to give you plenty of time. If you have the lecture on Sunday, within a 2-hour block sometime throughout the week, you should definitely be able to go through the lecture material as well as work through the worksheets. Okay, I'm going to talk about those in a little bit, but the worksheets for this course, that's probably one of the best study tools that you can use to help you focus and ensure that you're understanding the concepts as we go through, okay? And you know what? I actually didn't talk about the textbook last time, I realized. So this is the textbook. I have put a link to it under course information on both of our home pages. I'm using the second edition. There's a couple of chapter changes in there, but I've accounted for that. If you're using the first edition, that's okay. You can use first or second edition. There's just some errors that were corrected when moving from the first to the second. Okay, but otherwise, if you can get a hold of that first edition copy, just as good. So for the evaluation method here in bio, it's a lot simpler in terms of it's more streamlined. We have lots of different modular quizzes and chapter quizzes scattered throughout anatomy, but here just every single week, every Friday at 2 o'clock, once our tutorial's over, you'll have a weekly quiz that will open. And you'll notice here that there's going to be 11 quizzes in total. So this week we actually have 2, and we'll talk about those. You're going to have 11 quizzes you'll complete in total, and FOL is going to automatically drop your lowest grade. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to do anything for that. That all will happen automatically. Let's see here. Okay. The midterm exam scheduled for week 6. So we have that week just set aside for our exam. That will be written starting at 1 o'clock on that Friday, and I have the date listed on the course plan. Okay, so the midterm is going to be worth 30%, and then the final exam will be written on the Friday in week 13. Starting at 1 o'clock, and that will be worth 40% of your final marks. So note, for both anatomy as well as biology, the final exam will be cumulative, which means there will be a component that will cover everything prior to, say, the midterm exam. Okay, usually it's weighted so that there's far more focus, like even 75% focus maybe on everything past the midterm exam. But I will let you know the exact breakdown once we get closer there, okay? In terms of missing a test or an exam, you need to let me know, this is key, write this down, you need to let me know before the exam begins, okay? So just send me a quick email whenever it is before. So when I'm talking about exceptional circumstances, you know, whether there's a death in the family or whether you're ill for whatever reason and you're unable to write the exam, just make sure you send me just a quick email letting me know that you won't be able to write, okay? That's sort of the main criteria. And then in certain circumstances, documentation will be required, and then I'll just schedule that retest for you within the week, okay? Tools for success in bio looks similar to tools for success in anatomy. The weekly announcements will be posted every Saturday at 8 a.m. Okay, I like to be creating routines myself, so that hopefully that helps you create your own routines as well. Okay, and there in the announcement, you're going to have everything outlined for what you need to do for that week. And if you're ever not sure, go to the online learning module section, and then that will show you also what needs to be done for that week. Make sure you complete the readings before the lecture, as I recommended before. It just helps to ensure that you've at least been able to visually you know, see the information as well as interpret that. But then it gives you that sort of first go at it before then in lecture, you're getting the second go at the material. So then by the time you go to study, you've already seen the material 3 times. It just helps the more often that you're going through this content, the easier it's going to be for you to retain all that information. Now the worksheet packages, every single week there's a worksheet package, and I've also included the worksheet answer key. So you have everything you need there to be able to complete them. Definitely to your benefit, work through the package and then use the key to be able to just verify your responses, okay? Vocabulary glossary in bio, just as essential as in anatomy, because we're going to be learning about lots of new terms. And for those of you who weren't here the other day, vocabulary glossary is essentially just every time you see a new term, I want you to either write that down if you're somebody who likes pen to paper, or if you've got your own little Word document that you can just continually add new terms to. And then, you know, once you're finished that lecture, go and then you can define them. And then when you're reading back through the material, it helps you to be able to have a short list of what you can go over and cover for yourself. All right, flashcards also, if you just set up yourself with cue cards, going through the material really quickly. I see there's a question there about Mobius. And yes, I'm going to be looking into that this weekend further. Because I do have an account set up. I went into it and there was some elements to it that seemed like they hadn't either been activated or they weren't working properly. So I want to make sure I touch base with Wendy and then I'll get back to you about the Mobius online portion of the textbook. Okay. So Kahoot reviews. You can take a look at those again today, repetition, and then let me know if you need help at any point in time in the week, okay? I am always here. Your emails come directly to me, so I can get back to you hopefully as soon as possible. So we'll move to Fanshawe Online. Where I can walk you through the rest here. Okay. All right, so this is our home page. Again, the announcements will come up Saturdays at 8 o'clock. And you will find everything that you need for that week. That's essentially a breakdown of everything I've already included in the learning module. Okay. Lecture links will be posted once I've uploaded the file to YouTube. And you can also find them in the content section. So we'll get there in just a second. If you're wanting to come to the class, this is the link that you can use to get to this Zoom meeting. I don't know if you used email links or how you got here. But anyways, that's the way that I've set it up so that you can just simply click and get here from our home page. So moving into the content section, it is essential, and I mentioned this before, but it's essential that you print off your course plans, okay? You wanna have a hard copy of this, especially for the How to Be Successful quiz that you're gonna be writing this week, okay? So in bio, we've created this how to be successful quiz in order to ensure that you've gone over all of the administrative details of the course. Okay, so questions will be taken directly from the course plan, from your schedule, when certain assessments are going to be, those kinds of items, as well as what we're talking about during this introductory component. So with the course plan, let's pull that up. Okay, it's set up exactly the same way as I did for anatomy. So you can see here you have your weeks, and that corresponds to the online learning modules. And then under the weeks, you have your dates as well. So for this week, we're going to be going through an introduction to the organization and properties of living things, as well as taking a look again at homeostasis. We already learned it in anatomy, and now we're going to review it today. Something that's very important and kind of crucial to the both courses, actually, as we're going to progress through them throughout the year. So your readings for each week are included here under preparation and learning resources. All of the other learning resources that you're going to use, you can find under the online content modules. And then you can see here the associated evaluation. So this week you have the 2 quizzes. Don't be psyched out by that. Okay, the How to Be Successful one is meant to kind of empower you, give you a good little boost at the very beginning here. Okay, you might have had to write something like that for some of your other classes too. And then quiz number 2 will be focused on the content that we cover from lecture. Okay, so you'll see there you have quizzes every week. We have our midterm exam in week 6, and then our final exam in week 13. Okay, so I know that the anatomy dates were different, so you were writing those on the Thursday. That was just based on the request from our course lead. We're lined up for Fridays with my course lead from London, so we don't have to make any changes there. Okay, so those will just be the Fridays of those weeks. We'll start at 1 o'clock, and I'll let you know the time amount or allocation that you'll have for those exams once we get there. Just keep in mind, there's 11 quizzes. You get to drop your lowest one. Okay, so do them all. Okay, even if you're doing really well, just complete them all. Make sure that you don't lose any marks this way. Having 30% set aside for quizzes is a great way for you to be able to sort of work to building up your grade throughout the semester, instead of it just being really focused on a few major evaluations. So I'm hopeful that also having the weekly quizzes, it's going to keep you sort of in pace with the material, and you're not going to have legs where maybe one week, I won't do it this week. Well, you have a quiz that week, so I hope you do it. Let's see here, and I've included that. Okay, so that's our course plan. Oh, okay, I just see a question here. What if we don't have a printer? Okay, that's a very valid point. Just make sure that you are able to access the course plan when you're completing your quiz. Okay, so whether that's a separate window, you're not using Respondus Lockdown browser for these quizzes, so you should be able to access that file, or you could also just save it to your computer so you can have it as a PDF reference point. Okay. Hopefully that answers that question. Okay, now let's just go take a look at student policies. For those of you with accommodations, I've added the request form there. So if you have an accommodation, to be able to actually apply that accommodation to an assessment, I need to receive a request form. So because we have 11 quizzes, I'm not going to require an addition, an individual form per quiz. Just one form covers all the quizzes, and then one for midterm, one for final exam. And the same goes for anatomy as well. And then our online content modules set up the same way as anatomy. So hopefully there's, I've kept the continuity between how both courses are run. So hopefully that helps you. I will be posting our lectures that are recorded as well as tutorials, because once we get into pre-recording and then the separate tutorial, you'll have 2 videos every week. I'll post both of those under that lecture section. And then the learning resources, this is where you're going to go to get those worksheets. I'll pull this one up for this week. All right, so this is based on chapter 1.6, and you can see there most of it this week is just filling in the blanks. So it's actually kind of fun as opposed to short answer type of questions. All right, and that'll just help you focus your attention. And then we also have the answer keys for all the worksheets included there as well. I also have a YouTube playlist attached to the channel for any videos that pertain to the individual learning modules. Typically those videos, I would have them and I would play them either as an intro to the lecture or scattered throughout the lecture to help to illustrate a point. But just because I am recording these and copyright issues, I've provided links to all of those videos, so they're all there. So definitely go take a look at both classes. If you've ever looked at Crash Course, Hank is incredible. You will, yeah, you'll fall in love with those videos and they will become definitely a tool that will help you to be successful in both anatomy and biology. The Kahoot reviews are here as well. And then I've included, I originally labeled them as tutorial videos. These are from Wendy, who is the course lead, also the author of our textbook. So she has produced these and they are sort of smaller chapter segments. So multiple videos can apply to one learning module. But she's pre-recorded all of these. And so essentially it's like having another prof or another instructor. So use those as well in addition to what we're doing. My lectures are going to be similar to what we'd be doing in class, whereas you just get a different feel or a different way of experiencing the content through her videos. So, you know, whichever you find most useful, use, or, you know, use both of them. Okay. So I think for this course, you definitely have plenty of resources to be able to experience the content in many different ways, as I keep talking about. Okay. Those worksheets are going to be essential. Make sure you do those every week. I would say complete the worksheet before you go through and write the quiz. Okay. And that's the way I have it set up. So if you go to your module, see your lecture notes there, your learning resources, and then finally you have your quizzes here. So I'm going to be updating the times that they're going to open till 2 because that'll be the end of our tutorial, the end of the time that we've spent focusing on the material for that week. And then I'll make the quiz active for you. You have a full week, and that's not just for this week, that's going forward. Every week, you have the entire week to complete your biology quiz, okay? So aside from that, I think we've covered pretty much everything. We went through a Kahoot review sort of trial the other day, and we'll get used to using Kahoot as well in class. So if you're having issues accessing Kahoots or how to even run it yourself, please feel free to reach out, let me know. So at this point, are there any questions in regards to any of the administrative components of the course? Nope.
So for the accommodation thing, we have to give you 3 forms or just one?
One form for every assessment. So for quizzes, there would be a form, for midterm a form, and final exam a form. And you would see on on the form itself, there's an area for assessment name. So that's where you would include specifically which assessment we're looking at.
Can we send those all like this week or just
Oh yeah,
before?
no, as soon as you have them ready, I will accept them and I'll set up the accommodations accordingly.
Sorry, I missed that one note. My internet has been down for a little bit. What's the assessments that they were regarding?
The accommodations that we were just talking about? Or
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So some students have accommodations based on specific needs and requirements. And so those accommodations are applied to the assessments. But that would only be if you've met with the counselor and there's been a determination that an accommodation would be provided.
Okay, yeah, I'll be requiring the same stuff as well. So I'll have to but I'm still going through the process of getting everything sent in.
Yep.
And so because you're the same prof for our human anatomy as well, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
We just have to submit it once to you for the 2 courses?
No, it's essentially for every assessment. So, you know, whether it's this course, anatomy or chem or physics, you need to go through the process of submitting a form for every assessment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was there anything else I missed in the first bit? Because here in Stratford, our internet drops like 24/7 all the
Okay.
time. The internet wasn't up and running for the first like 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm recording the session, so everything that we've covered so far, if there was something when it dropped out, it'll be available probably within the next hour or so. So once we're finished, I can upload that and might give you a chance to go back through and see at what point you might have dropped out.
Oh, okay,
Does
awesome.
that sound like a plan? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so that's a good thing to mention as well. So all of these sessions are going to be recorded. I'm going to be uploading our tutorials. So you'll have a link to that video, just the same as you'll have the link to the pre-recorded lecture. Okay, so if for some reason, because of, well, I've had it happen a couple of times already this week where internet's cut out for people, just know that I am clicking the record button and that will be made available at another time. Okay, so and if it's a scheduling issue and you're unable to make our scheduled time, just know that that will still be there for you. All right. Okay, so if there's no other questions, let's move into our first lecture. Pause for dramatic effect. All right. Can I just have somebody in the chat confirm that you have my screen here with the
Yep.
chapter 1 material? Awesome. Okay, so let's get started. This week we are going to be covering chapters 1.2 and 1.6. You'll see there's overlap. So because we're using the same text for anatomy and for biology, there's certain elements we cover in bio in some chapters and then others from anatomy. So this week we focused on organ systems in anatomy, whereas what we're going to do here in biology this week is we're going to look at the classification systems of living organisms in chapter 1.2. And then we're going to move on to looking at the properties of living, well, call it living things, but living organisms. Okay, so in contrast to what we're going to be covering in anatomy and with physiology there, so anatomy, remember, is the study of the physical structures of an organism. Then physiology, you're looking at how all of those structures are going to be working together, right? So we talked about how, you could be looking at the structures, your forearm, bones, so you have your radius, your ulna, and how they then connect with the humerus. Then you can look further at how those are going to articulate with the humerus and forming the functional hinge joint, which is your elbow joint, okay? So that's how you take the study of just the structures themselves and move towards looking at how those structures are then functioning within the organism. Now with biology, bio refers to life. And so we're looking there at the study of all living things. And the key there, classifying living things, okay? And one of the reasons that we are stuck behind a computer right now is because of a virus, and a virus actually is classified as a non-living organism. So we're going to get to that difference in a little bit, and we'll talk about sort of one of the key reasons that viruses are classified as non-living, okay? Now, genetic variation is very important to the survival of any population of organisms. We're going to be looking at primarily animal and plant kingdoms when we're focusing on most of the early biological principles, especially in chapters 2 and 3. Now, of approximately 8.7 million species currently known to be living on Earth, all of these can be classified into 6 different kingdoms. Okay, so the kingdoms are sort of those primary groupings, classifications of living things. Right? Now, this is something that I decided to put back into the lecture. They were originally planning on removing this component and trying to move some of the content around, but I think it's really important that we start here as sort of this is the foundation that we're establishing here as we move forward in the rest of the course. So these 6 kingdoms, you can see them listed here: archaeobacteria, eubacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. And what this is showing you here is just, it's a phylogenetic tree, which essentially is an evolutionary diagrammatic tool that can be used to trace, sort of origin or ancestry of different kingdoms that you can see here. Okay. Now, this is the image that I took from the text, showing you another example of a phylogenetic tree, much more complex and complicated, showing you sort of origins from original cells through eukaryotic versus prokaryotic evolution. You don't have to worry about any of this, okay? Our focus here is going to be primarily here, looking at the 6 kingdoms as they exist today and which organisms fall under which of the 6 categorizations, okay? So that's the first thing that you need to take away from today, is those 6 kingdoms. So archaea bacteria, listed as archaea here, eubacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Now, the organisms in each of these kingdoms can be categorized based on the following characteristics. So first off, in some of these kingdoms, you have single-celled organisms, others you have multicellular organisms, and in some, you can have a mix of both. Then also, what sometimes can be confused as similar terms, we can define cell types as prokaryotic or as eukaryotic. Okay, and sometimes people think, well, prokaryotic means single cell or eukaryotic means multicellular. Okay, well, this is what they are actually defined as. Prokaryotic refers to a simple cell structure, and typically prokaryotic cells then would exist as single-celled organisms. Eukaryotic are more complex, and you tend to see that eukaryotic organisms exist as multicellular organisms. However, there's an exception here where you can have eukaryotic, so a complex cell type that exists as a single cell, and that's our protists, protista. Okay, so we'll visit that again. You'll hear that over and over, but just keep in mind, those aren't referring to the same thing. So single cell, meaning the organism is literally made up of one cell. So for example, a bacterial cell, okay? That is one bacterium, and they are just a single cell. Whereas with multicellular, lots of different cells. And as we're going to move through anatomy, you're going to see that all of my skin, all of my bones, my muscles, right? It's all made up of many cells, right? And the cells make those tissues, and the tissues make the organ systems, right? Remember that classification of an organism? Okay. So that's what single cell versus multicellular is referring to. Prokaryote, simple structure, eukaryotic, complex. And we'll look at images of those in just a couple of slides. Also, you can classify in either of these kingdoms based on the environment in which organisms live, movement, whether or not they locomote, how energy is acquired is another one. So we acquire energy to the food that we eat, right? Whereas plants, well, how are plants acquiring energy? Jump into the chat box there.
The soil.
Okay, so they're getting nutrients from the soil, yeah, and then ultimately it's the sun, the UV rays. The plants are photosynthetic, right? Yes, I see that. There we go, photosynthesis. Okay, so the plants are photosynthetic, and they are taking those UV rays, they're taking energy from the sun, and they're then converting that into usable energy. And then what happens is animals are going to eat the plants, herbivores are going to eat those plants, we eat those animals, right? It's transfer of energy, but ultimately the ultimate source of energy is the sun. All right, but some kingdoms, specifically the organisms, are photosynthetic, meaning they obtain it directly from the sun. Others then, such as us, omnivores, or if some of us are, yeah, well, we all are all omnivores, meaning we can eat both meat and plant product. I'm sorry, whoops, hit that. All right, so prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. So remember, prokaryotes are, like anybody in the chat?
Simple.
Simple, exactly. Okay, prokaryotes are simple versus eukaryotes are complex. So there's a few things that make eukaryotic cells complex. First off, they contain membrane-bound organelles. And when we look at bacteria, which we will see in a couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at cell division and how bacteria divide through binary fission versus how our cells divide. our cells are very complex in that all of the different working parts, they're all bound from the intracellular environment, making them their own individual structure. Okay, so think of them as like working parts, working cogs in a wheel here. Okay, remember, does anybody remember what that central control center of the cell is?
Nucleus.
Nucleus, exactly. And then we have the energy powerhouse of the cell.
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria, exactly. Okay, so a lot of this is probably going back to, you know, whether you've taken other biology courses in postgrad or whether this is from high school. You know, you've learned about the cell at some point. This is looking at just the typical animal eukaryotic cell. Okay, so the eukaryotic cell is complex because there are these membrane-bound organelles and each of them has a specific function that helps that cell to function. And so you can almost look at it, they're called organelles, right? Remember, in an organ system in us, we have individual organs all working together to help that system function, which then helps us function, right? So if you go down to the basic building block level, each cell in our body has its own organelle system, and all of those organelles are supporting that cell in some way. Now compare that then to prokaryotic organisms. The key here is prokaryotic organisms do not have any membrane-bound organelles, so they don't have a nucleus. Instead of putting all of their DNA inside of an organelle like the nucleus, their DNA is just located freely floating within the cytoplasm, and that's in a region that's known as the nucleoid region. They do have ribosomes, which are essential for protein production, and cell walls as well. Okay, whereas in eukaryotic cells, we have plasma membranes or cell membranes, but it's only plant cells where you see those cell walls. All right, so some differences there. Prokaryotic, very simple in structure. Eukaryotic, much more complex. So now let's go through those 6 classification kingdoms. Okay, so we have the archaeobacteria. These guys are single-celled prokaryotes, which means they are simple in nature. All bacteria are simple in nature. Okay, the archaeobacteria though are very primitive. All right, so they have been around for a long period of time and they have been capable of adapting to lots of different environmental changes. That's why they can live in extreme environments, like in boiling conditions, like in volcanoes. You'd find archaeobacteria, certain species, within volcanic lava. Freezing, salty conditions, acidic conditions, sort of all those harsh conditions that normally life would be devoid from. You'll find archaeobacteria existing within those types of environments. Now, eubacteria, these are the ones that we hear a lot about because these are the ones that usually either are symbiotic to us, meaning that they're beneficial. We have, you know, E. coli within our GI tract, and it's beneficial to us. It provides us with a benefit. But then there's others that can actually cause harm to humans as well. So the eubacteria, think about those as the infectious organisms that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so they're still single cell and they're still prokaryotes. So you can't differentiate archaeobacteria or eubacteria based upon those classifications. Okay, archaeobacteria, one of the key things differentiating them is being able to survive in extreme conditions. If you were to take some of these bacterial populations and put them in an acid, they would not be able to survive. Okay, now most eubacteria are harmless to humans and helpful. That's where I use that term symbiotic. But some can cause human diseases, which you can see listed here. But also some of them that are symbiotic in certain parts of our body can also produce issues and cause us harm. So for example, I mentioned E. coli at the very beginning, right? So E. coli is a bacteria that exists within our colon, in our large intestine. So it's great as long as it's in there. But what happens if we ingest it?
Food poisoning?
Absolutely. So E. coli, so let's think of an example here. So a farmer who is using cow feces, so manure, to be able to fertilize their crops, you've heard of E. coli outbreaks, right? In certain produce and whatnot. So they're using that fecal matter to be able to fertilize their crops. Well, if that produce is not washed effectively, then some of that E. coli that was in the fecal matter can actually remain on the produce. And then if we end up ingesting it, that can cause a bacterial infection within our GI, and you end up with the symptoms that would result from that. Okay, so that's an example there. It's the same bacteria, but as long as it's living within the environment in which it's going to be helpful to us, it's providing us that benefit. Otherwise, if we were to ingest it and it enters into a different compartment of our body, it can actually be harmful. All right, so eubacteria, those are the common ones, the ones that you hear about. Now, protists, this is where we move from simple prokaryotes to the eukaryotic division, but we're still looking at a single-celled organism. Okay, so if you're thinking you can group single cell and prokaryote and complex multicellular eukaryotes kind of in those same groups, the protists are the ones that are sort of splitting the division. So they are single cell eukaryotes. They have similar characteristics such as chloroplasts, which allow them to be photosynthetic. They can also locomote. There's a YouTube video, I believe, in our playlist, which can show you there how a protist goes about moving around. It's pretty neat. And then also can produce spores for reproduction, which is similar to the fungi kingdom. So a lot of these plants, animal, fungi, those are all the eukaryotic kingdoms. So there's a lot of similarities that protists have to them because they are eukaryotic in nature, although they are single cell. Has anybody ever heard of these two terms, flagella or cilia? And what are they?
They're movement structures within the cell.
I'm hearing that. So movement structures, right? So cilia can be used by a cell to detect where it is in space, but it can also be utilized to be able to move around in space. So the cilia, you can almost see them here, are like fine hair-like projections around the outside portion of a cell. Okay, and we have certain cells in our body that are ciliated, and we'll talk about those next week actually in tissues and anatomy. Now, flagella is like a tail that's attached. And so the one cell in the human body that is capable of locomotion is the spermatozoa, sperm cells. They are capable of locomoting, and they possess a flagella, which is like that tail, that actually helps to move them around. Okay, so flagella and cilia, both structures that can allow for movement. Fungi are multicellular eukaryotes with the exception of yeast. Okay, so make a little note of that. We mentioned that a little bit later as well. Yeast are unicellular eukaryotes. Okay, now fungi are non-photosynthetic, where plants are photosynthetic. So a big difference there. And fungi also produce spores. Plants multicellular eukaryotes, and they are photosynthetic. Now, plants have the ability to live on land or in water. And the same thing with the animal kingdom. Animals can live on land or water. When you think about it, we and fish are part of that same animal kingdom, right? So a pretty large classification criteria there, but nonetheless, both of us are part of that kingdom. Animals, multicellular eukaryotes, animals are non-photosynthetic. And so where do animals get the energy from if they're not getting it from the sun? Obtaining it from the plants or from other animals that have ingested those plants and obtained energy that way. All right, so those are the 6 main kingdoms of classification of living things. So make sure you understand, for each one, actually create a chart for yourself. So if you have just a list of the 6 kingdoms and then have a column multicellular or unicellular, put that in. Next column over eukaryote, prokaryote, and then photosynthetic, and then environment and locomotion. And you've got everything from all of these slides all on one nice sheet of paper for yourself. Okay, so lots of ways to really, pare down the information so it doesn't feel like information overload. All right, so we're going to move into properties of living things, and then we are going to be wrapping up our lecture this week, the same as we did with anatomy, looking at homeostasis. Okay, so before I move on, are there any questions so far? This is one of the things I like about a live lecture. You can ask the questions as we go. Any questions so far from the kingdoms?
I just have a tech question. I was trying to print off these slides, and for some reason it doesn't, none of them come up. Like the front picture of the guy from the textbook comes up, but that's it.
And nothing else is, okay, so nothing else is coming out when you're downloading them?
I didn't download it. I just printed right from FOL.
Oh, okay. It could be sometimes with FOL, it takes a while for the actual file. Like when you click on it, if you're still in that window, sometimes it doesn't convert the entire document. So I would probably suggest to download the file to your computer and then open it up with PowerPoint. And then from there, it should be okay to print.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't see any other questions. Yes, thanks, Melissa. Okay, so let's move on to properties of living things here. Okay, so remember I said at the very beginning, what's that one organism, if we can call it that, that's not considered a living thing?
Virus?
A virus, you got it. Okay, so we're going to go through the properties here of living things, and then when we get to specifically reproduction, I want to talk a little bit about then why viruses can't be classified as living things. All right. All right, first off, all living things are made up of macromolecules. Okay, so we've already talked about this, so this term should be familiar. We talked about macromolecules when looking at the levels of hierarchy. Remember the pyramid? What was that basic level of organization called?
Chemical.
Chemical, exactly. Okay, and at that chemical level, we were looking at how the atoms, right, those little Lego pieces, are then put together to form molecules. And then you can take smaller molecules and build up larger macromolecules. Okay, so that was that whole baseline, right? That whole chemical level of organization. So the organic macromolecules that make up every living thing are made up of 4 main atoms. Okay, so we have carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Got trigger happy there. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. So then you take those atoms, those specific ones, and you're putting them together in different orientations to create different molecules. And the 4 main monomers that we can form are sugars, amino acids, fatty acids, and nucleotides. And when I use the term monomers, we use a whole bunch of monomers to make up a polymer, and that polymer is your macromolecule. Okay, so if we take a whole bunch of sugars and we put them together, we're making our complex carbohydrate. All right, if we take a whole bunch of amino acids and we put them together, does anybody know what we're making?
Fat?
With amino acids, we're going to be making proteins. It's going to be the fatty acids that are going to be chained together to then make the fats, and then the nucleotides to make our nucleic acids. Now, I'm sure we've all had some exposure to DNA. And so if I'm going to type here in the chat, you've all seen some sort of like genetic code like that, right? So those letters, A, T, T, C, C, G, G, C, those are all referring to individual nucleotides, okay? And when you string up all of those nucleotides together, you then produce your nucleic acid. Okay, so this is an important, we're gonna talk about this over weeks 2 and week 3. Okay, so we'll revisit this again, but it's gonna be essential that you know which monomers make up which polymers as we're going forward. Okay, so there's your 4 atoms that make up your organic molecules: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and then you have your monomers that are produced: sugars, amino acids, fatty acids, nucleotides, and those are all used to produce your macromolecules: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids. All right. So when you think of macromolecule, think of what do I see on the nutrition label? All right. The only thing you don't see is nucleic acids, but we'll talk about that in, I think, next week. So nucleic acids here, this is just another visual for you. So I gave you that sample of a nucleic acid sequence, A, T, T, C, C, G, G, C, I wrote down in the chat. So you can see here, we have another sequence, T, A, C, T, C, and then we have a complementary pairing here of the complementary base pairs, G, A, G, T, A. Okay, now we know if it's double-stranded, that must be our DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. Or maybe you don't know. I don't know what your background is in biology, but we're going to spend lots of time next week looking at nucleic acids in more detail. And then we're going to spend much more time looking at DNA once we get to the second half of the course in the winter. And then if you recall, to make a protein, what was it that we were using as the monomer to make our proteins?
Amino acids.
Amino acids, you got it. I see that there in the chat too. Perfect. Okay, so here's an example. You can see here AA1, 2, and 3. This is just saying here's 3 generic amino acids, and we're using those amino acids, those building blocks, monomers, to build up this larger polypeptide, the protein. All right, so there's the first thing that classifies something as a living thing. It's composed of macromolecules, and you're going to find all of those macromolecules within that living thing. Okay. Second, they possess a cellular structure. So all living things, as we've already talked about, are composed of one or more cells. So you either are a unicellular organism or you're a multicellular organism. And then all of these cells, what defines a cell is the fact that there is a membrane. Okay, and you can see that here instead of me just using my hands, I can show you right here. There is a membrane that is separating the internal environment of the cell, known as the intracellular environment, from the extracellular environment. Okay, so that's key. They all possess a cellular structure, whether they're made up of one cell or more than one cell. And that cell is bound by a cell membrane, well, each cell is bound by a cell membrane that defines the intracellular space from the extracellular space. Okay, and this again is just revisiting some of the examples of the different organisms that we talked about, single-celled organisms and multicellular organisms. Recall yeast. What kingdom did we find yeast under previously?
Fungi?
It was the fungi, right? The yeast are the unicellular fungi. I think it's Sarah. Would you be able to just mute yourself? It's just taking the video back and forth from me to your screen. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so single cell versus multicellular. Also, they possess the ability to grow and to metabolize. Now, metabolism, this is a definition to get down right here, this first week, okay? It's the transfer of energy from one form to another. Okay, so meta is change, being able to change from one form to another. So we are able to take in any kind of nutrition and then break that down and then break bonds and create ATP and then use that ATP to be able to fuel our bodies to do all sorts of things, whether it's nerve conduction, whether it's muscle movement, so many things we're going to talk about throughout both this course and anatomy as we move forward, okay? So metabolism is the capacity to be able to take that energy and then transfer it from that one form, which we're eating, to another usable form that we can use to fuel our bodies. All right, and as I mentioned before, it's the sun that is the ultimate source of all energy, okay? So the sun is the one that is providing the energy to the plants. The plants are then transforming that solar energy into usable energy that then we or other animals are capable of ingesting and then using ourselves. Now here's a key one, and this is where it comes into play with viruses, okay? So remember, viruses are classified as non-living organisms, okay? And one of the main reasons why is because they require a host cell in which they can then reproduce. Okay, so in and of themselves, they also don't possess, membrane-bound organelles in that, but they are unable to reproduce on their own. Okay, so that's one of the things. That's why we are socially distancing with one another. That's why we're wearing masks. We're trying to limit the spread from myself to another individual. I'm not saying that I am infected right now, but you understand that, okay? So they require our epithelial cells to be able to get in there and then utilize the fact that our epithelial cells, which are the inner lining of our respiratory tracts, that they can get in there and then they can utilize the fact that those cells are going to reproduce They inject the DNA into those cells. That DNA then goes through the replication process, and now that cell has been able to or that virus has been able to multiply. Okay, so that is one of the main reasons. So viruses in and of themselves, and we'll look at this in a lot more detail towards actually the last week of the course, but all viruses are incapable of reproducing on their own. Okay, so when you hear too about like we're wiping down surfaces, right? One thing about COVID-19 is that it's capable of actually just surviving. Like DNA fragments can survive on inanimate surfaces for a lot longer than a lot of other viruses. And so that's one of the reasons why need to make sure that we're just always washing our hands to make sure that anything that we've touched or whatever didn't have any of those DNA fragments that would then get into our own cells and be able to multiply that way. Now, if you look at that, this is another classification criteria for something to be considered a living organism. All living organisms are capable of reproduction. Now, the rate at which they can do this varies from even species to species. So if you look here, for example, bacteria, and this is generationally speaking. So bacteria are capable of reproducing every 20 minutes, okay, which means within 20 minutes, the progeny from that initial, here we can look at it here. One bacteria goes through binary fission, produces 2 bacteria. Then 20 minutes later, those 2 can produce each another 2. So they split, producing 4, and then you continue on. So that's why with bacterial populations, they exhibit exponential growth. And we're going to focus on antibiotic resistance as well, taking a look at that once we get to the last week of the course too. Another example here, mice every 6 weeks. We moved into our new home last year, and then we had an issue with mice in our garage this past winter. And it did not surprise me because it seemed like it didn't matter when you thought you were solving the problem, that there just seemed to be new babies born all the time. But they are capable of reproducing every 6 weeks. With human, every 20 years. That's meaning from generation to generation. That's just a rough average, give or take. Now, there are different ways, though, that organisms can reproduce. So I've used this term already, binary fission. Now, binary fission is asexual reproduction, okay? And that you see within bacterial cells, right? So bacteria are able to divide, but what they do is they just simply duplicate their DNA and then split into 2. So there's really no genetic variation produced through simple binary fission, but they're able to reproduce really rapidly. Because remember, this DNA is not housed in a nucleus. In a prokaryote, the DNA just exists within the cytoplasm. So it can duplicate and then divide, all right? And that's why we see these rates every 20 minutes. You can have that generation being able to produce the next generation. So that's one issue here with binary fission, unable to produce the genetic variability. Now they have other ways, they're really crafty, of being able to figure out how to trick us. But for genetic variability, animal kingdom has the ability to sexually reproduce, where there's then the intermixing of DNA, which produces a lot of the genetic variability and also allows for the sustenance of a species. So here, for example, and these are numbers that are important for you to remember. A human has 46 chromosomes in every cell, okay, with the exception of their sex cells. Okay, another name for sex cells is gametes. So I might use gametes, I might say sex cells. In the ovum, as well as the spermatozoa, they are haploid cells, which means they only have a single set of chromosomes. Whereas within all of our cells, the rest of them, we have 2 sets. So we have 23 pairs, giving us a total of 46. So sperm and egg cells only have 23, whereas all of our other cells, they possess 46 chromosomes. All living organisms also contain genetic material, DNA, and that's what's being passed through the germ line and then finally through those gametes. And the DNA in all organisms must divide before the organism itself can divide. DNA contains genes, and we're going to look at genes in a lot of detail once we get to the second semester. We're going to spend about 3 weeks where we focus in on DNA, looking at how we are capable of going through the process of replication, reproducing our DNA, creating new cells, and then also looking at some of the gene technologies that exist. Now, if you were to just look at heredity material, and you just thought, well, hey, viruses, don't they contain, you have RNA viruses, you have viruses with DNA, so they contain that material. Yes, they do. But this is the key here, is that all of these following elements, I believe there's 7 in total that we're going over, all of them are essential for identifying an organism as a living thing. Okay, so there are some of them that apply to viruses, but if you recall, cell structure as well as reproduction, viruses do not possess that. And then with evolution, all populations can continuously change genetically from one generation to the next. The key element here is that if we have mutations in any of the cells, they're called somatic cells of our body. So the cells that differentiate into your skin cells or your muscle cells or your nervous cells. Mutations there are usually isolated to the individual. It's when there are mutations that exist within the germ cells of the gonadal structures. So in the testes or in the ovaries, when those germ cells have a mutation in them, that mutation is going to be passed on to the gametes. And then that is when you have the sperm and the egg uniting, creating that zygote, that mutation can be passed on. Okay, so that's a key element there for those changes, is that the germ cell mutations that occur are the ones that are ultimately going to be passed on. And here we go, last but definitely not least, the ability to maintain a stable internal environment, right? We went over this before. All living organisms have the capacity to be able to maintain homeostasis, that level of equilibrium. And we looked at these different examples here. So blood pH, blood sugar, body temperature, these are all actually examples of what type of feedback mechanism. You know this one for sure. Let's jump into that chat. If body temperature goes up, what does our body want to do? Negative. There we go. There we go. Okay, so if our body temperature is rising, what ends up happening? We start sweating or perspiring to help bring down that body temperature. If our body temperature goes down, we get colder. Then what ends up happening? We start shivering, right? So that helps to bring back up that body temperature. So remember, negative feedback, your stimulus is taking you in one direction. The negative feedback mechanism is going to counteract that to help to maintain equilibrium. Now, if we contrast that with positive feedback, remember positive feedback mechanisms were like a runaway train where the stimulus is amplified. The whole feedback loop, the response is going to increase that original stimulus. And the 3 examples we talked about, labor and delivery, lactation, and blood clotting. Now, this is something that's new for you here, and it's a list of all the different types of receptors. So I would highly recommend add all of these to your glossary, okay? There's some fill in the blanks in the worksheets that you can work through that'll kind of test your knowledge a little bit. You definitely need to know the functions of each of these, okay? So let's run through them. Some of them we'll talk about in different contexts when we actually see where they apply in the anatomy later on, okay? So first off, chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors detect chemicals such as neurotransmitters, drugs, or hormones. We have chemoreceptors that are detecting certain levels of different substances in the body, specifically oxygen, carbon dioxide levels. So we have chemoreceptors that are capable of detecting when we have too much carbon dioxide in our blood. And then there's a feedback mechanism set in place to then help us to start to breathe more so that we're getting rid of that excess carbon dioxide. So that's one example of a chemoreceptor that we have in the body.
Is that where chemotherapy gets its name from, is from the chemoreceptors?
Chemotherapy gets its name from the fact that it's a chemical that's being applied as a therapy to essentially kill the cells.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But cheme, that's you know, chemical. That's where that's coming from.
Okay.
Okay. Now with osmoreceptors, think osmolarity. Okay, we're going to talk about that, I believe, in week 3, I think, maybe week 4. Anyways, it's going to come up, okay? Where we're going to talk about osmolarity and the ability to maintain ionic concentration. So how concentrated a solution would be, okay? So our osmoreceptors in the body are able to detect changes in osmolarity. So how much of a certain ion is there within you know, the blood, for example. Okay, and we're able to then make changes based on that. There's ways that we can regulate our kidneys to be able to get rid of more ions if we have too much, say sodium. If our sodium's too high, we have ways to get rid of the excess sodium from our blood. And same with a lot of the other ions as well. Tactile receptors, we're going to look at these when we look at the integumentary system. We're going to look at the skin, and we're going to see all of these receptors that exist within the skin that helped us to differentiate the difference, right? Like, so if somebody was to just, you know, even just, I don't know, I don't have a feather on me. You had a feather, you know, light touch, or even just being able to sense general touch or pressure, you know, or vibration. We can sense all the differences there between those different sensations. And that's because we have individual tactile receptors that are responsible for helping us to differentiate between those different sensations. Baroreceptors detect pressure. So the prime example, and we're going to see this in the aortic arch, which is the major blood vessel that comes off of the heart, as well as in the carotid artery, which is the next major that goes up into and feeding our brain with oxygenated blood. In both the aortic arch and the carotid artery, we have baroreceptors that are there to detect if we have sort of slightly elevated pressure or lowered pressure. And then we're able to there's a feedback mechanism actually that innervates the heart and can cause it to increase the rate of contraction or to decrease the rate of contraction. Okay, so here's an example of how this works. Say, and this is not saying, you know, if somebody has systemically high or chronically high blood pressure, that the baroreceptors are just kicking in and taking care of that. Like, there's other reasons that an individual would have chronically high blood pressure. But for different changes, think about like you're laying down and then you go to sit up. Well, there's going to be slight changes and variations, right? You're all of a sudden, some people end up where they experience a little bit of lightheadedness sometimes. If your vessels don't constrict to maintain pressure, then the blood can then drain out a lot faster. These baroreceptors can detect if your blood pressure starts to drop, it signals the heart start contracting faster, and that's going to increase the pressure. So they act in sort of like a negative feedback mechanism. And then vice versa, if your pressure is a little bit high, it can signal the heart to slow down the rate of contraction, okay? So those are baroreceptors. And baro, actually, this is a really good way to remember this. Think barometer, right? What's a barometer doing? It's measuring atmospheric pressure. So the baroreceptors within our own anatomy, they are detecting the pressure within specifically our cardiovascular system. Photoreceptors we have in the retina. So we have rods and cones that are capable of detecting light and then converting that into a neurological stimulus, which then gets interpreted by the occipital lobe of our brain. Okay. Mechanoreceptors, we have Golgi tendon organs located in all of our tendons, as well as spindle fibers in all of our muscle bellies. So if you think about like your bicep muscle, okay, just the bulk of that, that's what I'm talking about when I say the muscle belly. Okay, the tendons are those like guitar strings that you feel at either end of a muscle. Okay, so in the tendons, we have Golgi tendon organs. That's a mechanoreceptor. And in the muscle belly, you have the spindle fibers, and those are also mechanoreceptors. And what they're detecting is the amount of stretch. Okay, because you want to ensure at no time that any one muscle in your body is being overstretched. And if it is, that sends a signal to then contract to counteract that. It's a protective mechanism. Proprioceptors. If I wasn't wired up, I need to get wireless headphones so I can maybe stand and move around and stuff. If you were just to stand right now, close your eyes. Okay, for the most part, you should be able to stand still, right? Your body is able to detect if you're sort of swaying a little bit, and you're able to counter those movements. Now, there's the vestibular system, which is part of the inner ear, that's going on. There's also proprioceptors that are active in all the different muscles in your body. Specifically, I want you to think about the muscles that surround, so your lower leg, your ankle, into your foot. Okay? As I start to tilt a little bit here towards my left, can you appreciate that my right ankle on the outside is going to be stretched? And then the inside of my left ankle is going to be stretched. Okay, so as you're doing that, if your eyes are closed, there is a signal being sent to your brain, and you're able to interpret that amount of stretch. That's telling you where you are in sort of in space. Okay, and that's the phenomenon of proprioception, the ability to detect your body's position based upon different movements. Okay, so like for example, if somebody were to take my finger and they were to point it down, I could tell because I can feel. You don't think about this, but you can feel the stretch going on up top, and you can feel that it's, you know, being sort of compressed lower down, and then you interpret that as, yes, I know, you're pointing my finger down. So it's the activity of those proprioceptors that are really giving us that ability to detect body's position. All right, nociceptors, yes.
I'm sorry. The mechanoreceptors and the
Yeah.
proprioceptors?
Yeah.
Is it just the interpretation of the signals that differentiate what the detecting the stretch?
Yeah, you could look at it like that. That's actually a really good way to look at it. Yeah, because essentially they're both, in a way, like the proprioceptors are detecting stretch, but there's not a protective response because of them. The mechanoreceptors that are detecting the stretch in those tendons would be signaling protective response if you were to be overstretching them. But the proprioceptors are sort of, think of them as almost just like they're keeping you centered. So that's their response, is to keep you balanced.
Okay,
Does that
thank
make
you.
sense? Yeah, for sure. And kind of an interesting little neat side bit for any of you who are into sports, or even you don't have to be into sports to have done this. I'm sure everybody here has at some point rolled their ankle. I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands, everybody would be throwing them up in the class. Well, every time when you have an individual with chronic recurrent ankle sprains, it actually reduces their ability for their proprioceptors to be able to send those protective sort of mechanism type impulses to be able to protect them from further injury. So that's why when you've rolled your ankle once, you're more susceptible to it. Partly too, if you've done damage to any of the ligamentous structures in that can predispose you, but it's mainly the fact if you don't rehab it properly, then because the proprioceptors and that signal has been damaged, it just predisposes that individual to more issues. So now I'm rambling, but I'm giving you some context outside of just the here and the now. Okay, nociceptors, detecting pain.
I have a question.
And
So,
we'll look
like-
at those once we get to the integumentary system. Okay, and then the last one, the thermoreceptors, are responsible for detecting temperature. All right, so I just saw that there was a question come in. I forget who that was.
Yeah, that was me. I was just asking
Yep.
because I had rolled and like torn the ligaments in my ankle so much from soccer. So my physio, they were dry needling the side
Yep.
of my leg. So what would have that done? The dry needling, they said it was to help me stop rolling my ankle, but like what would have the needling done?
Well, with okay, so there's that's a big topic of acupuncture and what's going on there with sort of nerve feedback and that. But yeah, the whole goal of acupuncture is essentially there's two main things going on. You're sort of causing micro traumas to the tissue, which are then stimulating a repair response of that tissue. So that can help it to repair, but then it's also stimulating the nervous tissue in that area. Because if you picture, say, like an acupuncture needle, if it goes through the skin, well, it's not, where's my hand? Okay, so if it's going through the skin, it's not just passing just through the skin, it's going down through muscle. And think about all the different nerves that are innervating just that one point in the body. So there's a lot that we could go into with acupuncture and what's going on there, but that's essentially, that's their approach, is that they're trying to stimulate, and you can use also stimulation, where you're actually stimulating the muscles and the tissue in that area to try to improve the nerve conduction and the response within the local tissue.
Yeah, I actually would get that done to my shoulder because I had something called thoracic outlet syndrome. So like my shoulder was all loose. So they stick the needles in, and they were like teaching the muscle how to contract.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have that thing where it would beat, but like the muscle wasn't contracting at all.
Yeah. Had you been in a prior accident?
Yeah, so
okay.
it was an accident that caused that whole thing to happen.
Yeah.
And so then when they were trying to teach the muscle how to like beat again, it was kind of cool to see the whole process. But it'd be cool to know why that happens with just like the needle being in there, and then they attached like the stem to it.
Yep.
And then like over time it eventually learned how to contract, which was cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because essentially like what happens anytime that you damage the tissue, you're interrupting the nerve supply. And anytime a nerve gets, and we'll talk about this when we get to the nervous system towards the end of the course, but the nerve tissue does not regenerate readily. So if you think of somebody with a, like a spinal cord lesion, for the most part, I know there's a lot of research being done in stem cell research in that. But for the most part, on its own, it won't just simply regenerate. And so that's where with even micro traumas to tissue, that can interrupt the nerve supply. And so by stimulating the muscle, you're almost like reteaching it. You're reteaching the whole path, and your brain and the connection there with the motor output. You're almost like, yeah, it's like a reteaching or a relearning that's going on.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. But it's good to have a little bit of interaction here. It's good. So those are the receptors. Okay. So just make sure you understand those. I've given you a lot of examples of them, but really just as long as right now you know the name and then you know their function, you're set for at this point. Okay. The rest of it, we're going to go through as we progress through the course. Okay. So a couple of, just two new parts to the cycle. I know in anatomy, we talked about the cycle of feedback being that there's receptors, the control center, and then the effectors. Okay, so the receptors are receiving the incoming stimulus. The control center is then deciding what needs to be done to correct what's happening, and then sends a signal to the effectors, which are what are going to cause the effect or the response to take place. So you'll notice in your worksheet starts with stimulus, ends with response. Okay, so we're now taking it from just these three, that there is a stimulus at the front that is going to stimulate the receptors. Okay, and then that information is going to go to the control center. Control center determines what's going to happen, and the effectors will respond. Okay, so the cycle for our purposes here in biology starts with stimulus, receptors, control center, effectors, response. Okay, but everything else remains the same. So here we're looking at an example of negative feedback, right? Because we're looking at body temperature. So body temperature goes up. Okay, what types of receptors? It says temperature sensors. What are the temperature sensors in the skin that we just learned about? Yes, okay, this is where the prefixes come into play. So if you know your prefixes, you can kind of make up words too. But yes, thermoreceptors, okay? So those are the ones that are going to be detecting those changes in the skin. They send then that afferent information to the hypothalamus, which is located in the brain. The hypothalamus is then going to determine, okay, what needs to happen now is we need to start, what was happening, body temperature was going up, so we need to start to sweat to lose a lot of that heat. Then we bring back our homeostasis. So body temperature is going up, negative feedback, bringing it back down. Okay. We've talked about positive feedback, and this is just an actual overview of the whole process of the positive feedback mechanism we see in labor and delivery. So I believe this is, oh, and then we have blood clotting. Okay, so we'll finish with these two. So first off here, when a woman goes into labor, a release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary occurs, and then that travels through the bloodstream and then ends up at the uterine lining, okay? And the specific layer that the oxytocin is going to interact with is the muscular layer of the uterus, known as the myometrium. Okay, so the brain is stimulating the pituitary to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin ends up at the uterus, and it's going to then act on the muscular layer, the myometrium, to then contract. So when the contracting occurs, that is going to push the fetus further down, further stretching the cervix. Okay, and the stretching of the cervix, as well as of the myometrium here, is going to then, that stretch receptor is going to then send a signal back to the brain. Going to stimulate the brain to secrete more oxytocin from the pituitary, and then that oxytocin travels through the bloodstream, ends up at the uterus, causes further contractions, and those contractions are continually propelling the fetus to be born. And as that happens, the head is going to continually to stretch and to push against that layer, further perpetuating the cycle. Okay, so that's how positive feedback works. Okay, it's always going to be amplifying the original stimulus. I believe that's the end here. Okay, so our positive feedback for clotting, same kind of thing. Remember, going to continue to amplify the response until something finally takes place. Okay, so here, the positive feedback cycle is initiated. Okay, so one of your vessels has been damaged. If you just have a small cut in your skin and you have just a little drop of blood, it's likely just a capillary. If you see the Grey's Anatomy, like, you know, spurting blood, well, then you've hit probably a major artery. So anyways, regardless, when there's any kind of injury to the blood vessel, this kicks off the entire blood clotting cascade. So first off, platelets are going to start to adhere and release specific chemicals, okay, here at the site. And then that's going to start to form a plug. So as that plug starts to form, that causes more chemicals to be released, thereby attracting more platelets. And so it's just attracting. Remember, platelets are those specific cells that are responsible for blood clotting that are just freely floating in the blood. So it's the release of the chemicals that are signaling the platelets to come and to congregate at this site where the injury has taken place. That's going to continue to accelerate until that final plug is formed. All right, so there you go. We did pretty good with time today. So that finishes up our first week for both courses here. Next week for biology, we're going to be covering, we're looking at water actually, and then looking at properties of water and how the specific properties interact with all of the macromolecules in our body to create the specific types of environments that exist within our body. Okay, and then we'll take a look at proteins as well as nucleic acids. And then the week after, we'll finish off the rest of the macromolecules. So for this week, just make sure you complete those 2 quizzes. The first one is just based on the course plan and sort of a lot of the administrative components that we talked about. So know our schedule, know the course plan. Don't worry if you don't have your textbook yet, because if there's anything that asks about specific content areas, i.e. chapters and what they're covering, it's all included where? On the course plan. Okay, so it's all there for you. Any questions that come up, please let me know. Don't stress out about that first quiz number 1. And if there's any questions before you do quiz number 2, just make sure you email me and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'll open it up right now for any questions. And if there's no questions, you are all free to leave, and I will I'll hang around until our chat's empty. You are welcome.
Do you know how to, like, I'm still at printing off your lectures.
Okay.
So I tried to download it, and then my computer said that I don't have any software to open it because I don't have PowerPoint. So how do I get around that? And
okay, yeah.
Or is it included in the Microsoft Office suite?
Yeah, do you have, is it a new PC? Or are you using a Mac?
It's a PC.
PC, okay.
Not new, but.
Okay, but did it come with Microsoft? The Microsoft? No. Okay. One thing that I can do is I can save them as a PDF, and then you can print the slides off that way.
That would be cool.
Because I can set it up so that you maybe print. How many slides would you probably have printed it off? per page?
4.
4 per page. Okay. So I can see if I can do that. I'll do that for this week, for next week, like for both this week's and next week's material.
Okay.
So at least you can then download the PDF and then you can get that loaded. I'm trying to think if, and if anybody else is here listening, if you can think of a go around here to help Nicole. So if you don't have PowerPoint.
I don't know, does Fanshawe, I know they offer like Microsoft Word, but does that include other Microsoft products like PowerPoint?
See, I know that you can download a basic version of PowerPoint, and it doesn't give you a lot of tools in that, but like I use a Mac, and I'm pretty sure that you can download a basic version of it just to be able to download and to print. So I'm not sure if you go on the site, if they do have a free version that maybe would allow you to print, but not necessarily produce. That might be something to check out.
Okay.
Because the other thing too is if they're uploaded to, I wonder if you could open it with Google Drive or something like that, because they can convert those files usually. Let me play around with that, Nicole, once we go offline, and then I'll make sure I kind of touch base with you. So if I can't figure it out, I'll make the PDFs and post those so they're available.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll try to figure out something else for you, because yeah, you'll probably have PowerPoints from all your classes to have to.
But it seems to work in my other classes. I don't know why I can't print directly from your slides.
Okay. I wonder if it's because have they saved it as a PDF maybe?
I don't know.
Okay. So let me check and see if I can figure out a go around with PowerPoint for you, and then if not, we can I can make sure that we get the PDF versions posted for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Nicole, you could probably try to use something like a online PowerPoint, because I know there's like PowerPoint and Word online that you can try to use, but
Well, I have to download Microsoft Word, and I know that it's from Fanshawe College. I just haven't navigated to there, and I'm not sure if it comes in a bundle with a whole bunch of other Microsoft
Oh,
software,
okay,
like
I got you.
Excel and PowerPoint. I was kind
They
of just hoping that somebody knew what the bundle offered.
Is that a bundle that you purchased? I just haven't heard of this.
You don't purchase it. It's
No?
offered through. It's free
offered through.
through.
Okay. I'm going to assume that yeah, it would be a whole suite. So it would be Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Have you navigated to that?
It's at Fanshawe Connected. That's all I know, but I
Okay.
couldn't figure it all out, and I just had to close out because for time constraints. So
Okay.
I have to explore that again, but I wanted to know if anybody else within the class had successfully downloaded it and what was included.
Okay, for anybody, Melissa, has anyone else been able to download that? So Cole, I see that you just got your schedule yesterday. Okay, so welcome to the program. So for Tuesday's class, for anatomy, we have a quiz that'll be due prior to the start of class on Tuesday. So we're gonna run that class the same as this one, yeah. So just make sure that that first introductory quiz gets finished. The lecture is posted already online, so you can listen to that whenever that works for you, and then you can go through the material that way. And I will be uploading this within the next, probably the next hour. By the time it converts the file and then it has it ready to upload, I'll make sure that that happens as soon as possible. And then I will post the link under the lecture portion of each online learning module. So every week that goes by, so for this one, for week 1 bio, you'll find it there listed as lecture. Okay, and you click on the link, it'll take you to YouTube. So Nicole, it doesn't look like anyone else has had any success there. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to take a look at this Fanshawe Connect for you. You troubleshoot too, and we'll see who figures something out first. If we can get that set up for you, and then you've got PowerPoint, and I don't see why that wouldn't include a whole suite for you. So I'm hopeful.
All right, I'll email you if I can't get it working for some reason.
Okay,
But
I'll take a look at it right now too. How about you do that? Give it a go. See if you're able to download it. I'll look it up too, and then if you are unable to, email me, and then I'll get those PDFs set up.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, then I'll stop recording here.